Welcome to week 13, day 60 of the spring 2025 Web Technologies course. I'm Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. So today we're going to go over JavaScript Chapter 16, how to work with objects, and then I'll also go through the Chapter 16 lab assignment as well. So let's get started on that. So as far as objects in JavaScript, objects are fundamental building blocks of JavaScript, allowing us to model real-world entities and organize our code efficiently. So we're going to go ahead and go through some concepts here. Use object literals to create objects that have properties and methods. Use classes to create objects that have properties and methods. Use properties and methods of the objects you create, and then we're just going to talk about JavaScript libraries in our applications, which we kind of already have done, like with Bootstrap, but sometimes there's other ones you're going to be using as well. All right. So as far as creating objects, JavaScript offers several ways to create objects, but the two primary ones are object literals and classes. So as far as object literals is concerned, an object literal is a simple and concise way to create objects in JavaScript. You define an object literal using curly braces. Inside the braces, you can define properties, basically key value pairs, and methods, which are functions associated with the object. So this is the basic syntax. So always make sure that you have the curly braces. Sometimes, students can get confused sometimes with that and arrays. Arrays you're using the brackets, but for objects you need to be using curly braces. So here's an example of an object, a person object, that has a first name, last name, age, and also it has an embedded function within the object, and it has this greet function. And as far as on this, we have this keyword, and I'm going to go ahead here, not right now, but I'm going to go into this a little more. We're kind of walk through the debugger, so I wanted to show you some things just hopefully to help you kind of understand that. I know this keyword can be a little bit confusing. So basically, to access this first name, you would do a person.firstName, that's going to access the property. And to access a function, you do the person and then the name of the function, and then obviously the open and close parentheses. As far as classes are concerned, so classes were introduced in the ECMA script 2015, which was ES6. ES6 is kind of what you've been using for the homework assignments here on the free code camp. So classes provide a more structured way to create objects. A class is a blueprint for creating objects, instances, and similar properties and methods. Now, one thing I do want to mention here, especially, so there's a few students that were not in the C# course. But, for the students that were in the C# course, they might be able to understand this a little better. And, don't worry if you weren't in the C# course, you're gonna learn about objects in the C# course. As far as the objects, as far as the JavaScript objects that we're going to be doing, as far as that, we're not going to be doing a significant amount. So you're not going to have to know a lot. In the second year, we'll go ahead and get into that a little more using JavaScript objects. But as far as, like I was saying, for C#, C# is basically a C# and other languages like Java and C++. These are considered statically typed languages where JavaScript is dynamically typed, right? So that's one difference. Another difference between languages like C#, C++, and Java, they're class-based. Where actually JavaScript does it a different way. They're called prototype-based. Okay, so it's there's that difference as well. Okay, so just not that you really need to understand all of that. I'm just kind of wanting to point that out. And as time goes on, through your education here at Rankin and your experience, you'll kind of understand that more as time goes on. But just kind of wanted to point that out. So there is a little bit of difference between how class-based works and prototype-based works. So even though you can use classes in JavaScript, it's handled a little bit differently, right? There's an inheritance model, and the inheritance model, for like I said, the C#, C++, Java ones, is basically a class-based, where for JavaScript it's considered the inheritance is a prototype-based, okay? So here's an example of a, this is basically the structure of a class. And you got a my class here, and you have a constructor. So you pass in property names or property values to set these property values, okay? Like I said, we'll go through this a little bit more when I do a little demonstration. I kind of want to walk through that in the debugger just to help you understand that a little better. And then also within a class, you can also have function calls, okay? Now this is kind of the newer way to do this. The older way is you also had to include function as part of this, the function name. But, with later versions of JavaScript, that's kind of been, it still can be used, but it's more concise just doing it this way, right? So in this case, you're defining a variable called myObject, okay? And this myObject is pointing to a new my class, okay? And so I do want to bring up this, and I'll probably mention this a couple times here this morning. So when you create a variable and you assign that variable to an object, so when you use this new my class, or even if you're doing it from an object literal, either way, whenever you create an object, so my class is going to create a new object. My class is the blueprint that's going to create a new object, right? And it's going to assign that to my object. So when you do this, okay, this variable actually doesn't point to, say, like a value, okay? And let me get into that a little bit more. So back when we did primitives, when we did strings and numbers and booleans, etc., the different primitives of JavaScript, them are all stored. And I recall we talked about this, maybe you didn't understand it, but them are all stored on a stack, okay? There's different places in memory. They're stored on what's kind of called a call stack. They're stored on a stack. So the variables are stored on a stack, okay? So they're in one part of memory. But everything there is based on value. So when you assigned a variable to, say, a string value of hello, okay? When you did that, it's basically based on value. Now it's different for objects though, okay? Objects are when you do this, you're actually pointing to a reference point, and this is going to be stored in a different place in memory. Not that you need to know this for the test, for the written test or for the labs or anything, but it's kind of background information. It's good to kind of start learning some of this stuff so you kind of understand the concepts. So when we create, and I'm going to show you an example to help explain this a little bit more here in a bit, but you're pointing to a place in memory, and it's on a, instead of the call stack, it's on a heap. It's a different place in memory. So you're pointing to a different place in memory for objects than you are for primitives, okay? And we'll go through that here in a little bit. So here's an example of a class called car, and has a constructor of make, model, and year, okay? And then it sets this dot make to the value. This one here is the one that's passed in. The model here that's passed in will be here, and this year here is here, okay? And like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this here in a little bit. And also, this class car has a function called start engine, okay? So to create a new car object, to create an object from this class, this blueprint, this car blueprint, you would do a new car, and you pass in the different parameters: Toyota, Camry, and 2023. Okay. And this here, to show an example, this will actually return the model. So you can, by accessing the name of your variable, dot the name of the property, and this is the property here, it will return the value of that. So in this case, the model would return Camry. And then also, just an example, this is how you would call start engine, by using your variable name, your object variable name, and call the function start engine on that. Okay. So distinguishing between object literals and classes. Object literals used for creating single ad hoc objects, and they are ideal when you need to, a quick way to represent a specific entity without the need of multiple instances of the same structure. So if you're calling something multiple times, you kind of want to create a class out of that. Sometimes you're doing something a little more simpler, where you're creating something and you want to, you create an object out of it, and then you're kind of using that, and that's about it. And then you're kind of, it's a throwaway, you're moving on, right? So when you do that, something like that, where you're just using it for one specific instance, and then you don't really care about it after that, you can go ahead and use an object literal. But if you're gonna using kind of a cookie cutter thing where you're wanting to create multiple objects, then you want to go ahead and create it as a class, right? So working with object members. Once you have created an object, you can access and manipulate its properties and methods. Okay. So accessing properties, you can access properties using the dot notation or bracket notation. So there's two different ways to do this. The dot notation is probably the most used, but you can also use the bracket notation, where you pass in the name like this, right? The property name like that. Bracket notation is particularly useful when the property name is stored in a variable or contains spaces or special characters. Because if for some reason you have special characters within your name, I don't know why you'd create it like that, but there's some instances that could happen. Well, if you do it like this, you try to put a special character like in here, this is going to cause some problems, something like that, right? But if you had that in here, you're not going to have that issue, okay? That's what that's kind of saying. Calling methods. You can call methods using the dot notation followed by parentheses. So here's this is talking about concise method syntax. In ES6 introduced a more concise method for defining methods within object literals and classes. So here's kind of a traditional syntax where you had to include the function here. Okay. And then the newer way is just basically getting rid of the whole function thing. It's kind of redundant and not needed. So object references. So when you assign an object to a variable, and this is what I was kind of talking about a little bit. So here, this is a literal, right? You can tell just by looking at it. This is an object literal, right? You're not creating a new class instance, right? When you assign an object to a variable, you are actually assigning a reference to that object in memory. And that's what I was kind of talking about, okay? If you assign that variable to another variable, both variables will point to the same object. Modifying the object through one variable will affect the object as seen through the other variable, okay? So in this case, you got object 1 with a value of 10. So, and then you're creating a new object 2 and pointing that to object 1, okay? Then here, you're taking object 2.value and assign it to 20. Now, if you print out object 1.value, it's going to print out the new value that you assigned here. So object 2 is object 2 is pointing to object 1. So object 1 and object 2 is pointing to the same place, same place in memory. So if object 1 or object 2 changes this value at all, it's going to be reflected by both of those. Okay? So that's different than when you do primitives, right? Primitives, if you assign one to another and you change the value, you change the value of the second one, it's not going to change the value of the first one because it's handled differently. It's stored by value, and it's not stored by reference. Okay, so that's the difference between primitives and objects. And so I want to also point out another thing here that can sometimes cause a little bit of confusion, and I'll demonstrate this as well here in a minute when we look at some code in the editor. But so an interesting thing here is you've created a constant named object2, right, that points to this. But then here you're changing the value of something in object2, right? So this is kind of a interesting scenario because you know from a primitive standpoint, when if you use a const keyword, right, and a const say x equals hello, and then you try to reassign your x variable to world, you're going to get an error, right? Well, it's kind of different because for a const, your variable is not pointing to a value, like I was saying. For an object, it's pointing to a reference. So it's still pointing to this same, so both of these, so object 2 and object 1 is pointing to this same object, right? But you can change the value of that object, right? As long as you don't reassign object 2 to a different to something else, you can still change a value within that object. Okay? So, I know that can be a little bit confusing, but I'll show you another example. We'll go through that a little bit more here in a bit so you can see that. It's important to understand that. Data properties and accessor properties. Data properties, these are standard properties that store values. So let's see. I don't think that did I have a first name, last name up here? I guess we did. I don't think we had that one here, did we? Oh yeah, we did. I've already forgotten what I was doing there. So, okay, accessing properties. So you can access properties using dot notation, yes, or bracket notation. So data properties, these are standard properties that store values. So in our previous examples, first name, last name, age, make, model, and year are all data properties. Okay, so data properties are different than accessor properties. Accessor properties, these are special properties that do not directly store a value. Instead, they define functions like a getter and setter. Okay, so that's one way. I know the C# students that were in C# familiar with the getters and setters. Obviously, the other students probably have not seen that before, but it's a way to get a value from an object or set a value on an object is using a getter or setter. And you use that to control how the property is accessed and modified. Getters and setters. So a getter is a function that gets the value of a property. It is defined using the get keyword. A setter, a function that sets a value of a property. It is defined using the set keyword. So here's a scenario where you've got a circle object. You gave it a radius, and then you've got a couple different functions, right? Basically a get diameter and a set diameter. And to know which one you're calling, to call this one, if you want to get the diameter, all you need to do is circle dot diameter. And this automatically calls the get function. Okay? You're basically treating the function as kind of a property, right? You're kind of treating it as a property. We're always used to calling functions. You have to make sure you had the open and close parentheses. But in this case, we're actually calling the function as a property. And then here to call the setter method, you do circle dot diameter, and you're just passing a value. And JavaScript under the hood figures that out. It figures out that since you're using circle dot diameter, you're actually calling the getter method. Okay? If you're not trying to set that to something, then you're not calling the setter. When you have an equal sign after your circle dot diameter, JavaScript figures out, oh, you're calling the setter method. Okay. Yep. And then to see once you made a change, this is just showing you that so you got the radius equal 5 at the beginning. You're changing your radius. This dot radius times 2. So on both, on the set method here, on the set method, you're basically, changing that. So to get the final answer, you just do circle dot radius. So getters can be used to create read-only properties by defining only a getter. And setters can be used to create write-only properties, which basically doesn't have, it's not very common to do only write.properties. But read-only properties, sometimes you just want to get things and you don't want to set things. And the reason for that is a lot of times you want to sometimes you don't want to have a setter for everything because you want to control. Sometimes you might be sharing code. Like, how we call in, like, the Bootstrap JS files. Well, you might be calling in different libraries. You may be the owner of a library. You create a library that other people are using. And so sometimes you don't want to have setter methods because sometimes those setter methods can mess up what, your whole code and the structure and how everything works, right? So sometimes you need to control that access to properties and only be able to do gets and not sets, right? All right. Let's just talk a little bit about libraries. JavaScript libraries are collections of pre-written JavaScript code that provide reusable functionalities. They can significantly simplify development by offering solutions to common tasks. So for our, in our situation, for what we've done so far, really it's probably the Bootstrap's probably about the only thing we've really done so far as that's concerned. So libraries are typically created by developers to encapsulate specific functionality, making them easy to include and use different projects. And it's just telling you how to include those in your project, which we've kind of already done. We also did jQuery too, so we included jQuery. We'll be doing some more of that actually here real soon because we're going to be doing some. We'll be doing some React and Node stuff. So we'll be doing some other things. It's kind of done differently. So yeah, next week we'll be starting Node.js and React.js. So you're going to learn a little bit about that. It mentions React right here. Classes for defining objects. As discussed earlier, classes provide a blueprint for creating objects. They allow you to define the properties and methods that instances of the class will have. The constructor method is a special method within a class that is called when a new object is created from the class. It is used to initialize object properties. And this is what I kind of already mentioned earlier. JavaScript has an inheritance hierarchy based on prototypes. And don't worry if you don't understand what all this means. It's not a big deal. Just maybe, it's kind of a reputation thing, and then, you'll be able to learn and understand a little more in depth about this. I don't want to, jump down that rabbit hole. But just, realize that JavaScript has, it has an inheritance hierarchy, and it's based on prototypes. Whereas other languages like C#, Java, C++ have a class-based hierarchy, and it's based on classes. Okay. Even though in JavaScript you can create classes, it's still under the hood. It's based on prototypes. Okay. So when you create an object, it inherits the properties and methods from its prototype object. The top of this hierarchy is the object. Okay. Here's a simplified view of the inheritance hierarchy for some common JavaScript objects. Okay. We're not going to get into this too much, but the base object, there's an object. An object is the base object from which all other objects inherit. Okay. So, understanding this hierarchy is crucial for knowing which properties and methods are available to different types of objects in JavaScript. You'll learn that, like I said, as time goes on. I'm not going to go through too much of this. But inheritance versus object composition, it could be a little confusing here. Like I said, just remember that JavaScript prototype based as opposed to class based for those other languages I was mentioning. All right, let's see what else I got here. All right, I don't want to get too involved in too much here. Did want to kind of talk a little bit about these nested objects here. So here's an example of a nested object where you have an object called user, right? You're doing object literal. Obviously, you can tell you're using object literal here. So you got a property name, and then you have this property details, and inside property details, you have email and phone. So actually what it is this user object has a nested object of details, okay? Just kind of showing you how you can access that. All right. So objects are the cornerstone of JavaScript. Understanding how objects create, manipulate, and work, and how and work with them is essential for becoming a proficient JavaScript developer. Okay. By mastering these concepts, you will be well equipped to build complex and well-structured JavaScript applications. So, this is, a process. Actually, some of the previous courses, we really didn't even get too far into the object-based stuff for JavaScript. And in the second year, we'll get much more in depth into this. And like I said, for what you need to really know for this object stuff is not a lot for the lab assignment. And, it's going to go, maybe a little bit more for the written test, but you guys will figure that out for the written test. Let me just kind of go ahead and go through the study guide, see if there's anything I wanted to kind of mention in here. So basically, how to work with objects, object literals. That's what we're talking about. Object references, when you assign an object to a variable, you're assigning a reference to that object, not a copy of the object itself. It's not a copy, as opposed to when you do primitives, you're not really assigning a copy. Yeah, you're assigning it by value, so you're not assigning it to the same one. So you can change when you do that with primitives. You can change one. It's not going to impact the other one. So always remember, changes made to an object through one reference affect all other references to the same object. So whenever you when you're ever doing object creation with a new keyword, you want to make sure you have your constructor. You have to have your new keyword. Okay. So also, JavaScript have some built-in objects. We kind of already used them in some assignments. Like the date object is it's a built-in JavaScript object, and it's basically the same thing as you creating your own object. So the same kind of rules apply, so to speak. So remember, classes is a blueprint for creating objects. A constructor is a special method within a class and initializes object properties when an object is created. And then also you have what's called instance methods, or functions defined within the class that operate on object instances. Okay. And then the new keyword used to create the object instances from the class. Yep. So whenever you create a class, make sure whenever you call it, you always have to use the new keyword. Okay, accessor properties, which we're already talking about. The purpose is to provide controlled access to proper object properties. You get the get keyword and the set keyword. So them are special keywords. You can't use get as a variable or anything because it's a keyword, right? So one of those reserved keywords. So get keyword defines a getter method that returns a property's value. A set keyword defines a setter method that modifies a property's value. And to state something is, if you want to say, hey, I want this to be read only, I don't want somebody updating any of this in here, then you do that by only providing a getter. If you only provide a getter, then it's a read only. You can't modify that, right? And then write only, a property with only a setter method is write only. Okay. But which is not very common. The read only is much more common. Okay, we went through JavaScript libraries. We can worry about that much. Okay. All right. Now let's go ahead and look at some code here. There's a few concepts, a couple things I wanted to really kind of point out here. That I think it's important for you to understand and know. So in here, here we got a person object. It has first name, last name, age, has a couple functions, has a greet function and a get age function. And, just real quick, this is kind of says traditional syntax here. This can be done a different way. You can basically get rid of that. You can get rid of that altogether, and you can get rid of this altogether. And now it won't be so traditional anymore. I do want to also show you, as far as this keyword, I know it might take some time to kind of understand some of this, but when you use this keyword, it's saying that the first name actually belongs to this object, this person object, okay? And then this last name belongs to this person object as well, all right? Now, if you create multiple objects, they'll have their own distinct first name and last name depending on how you create. If you created multiple, we're not doing that in this case, but just kind of pointing that out. Okay, so but by using this, it's saying that this first name belongs to this object and last name belongs to this object. Okay, and let me kind of show you the importance of this, which is something really interesting. And it's just kind of a scenario because of how we have some things named here. We have these variables, first name, last name, age, right? But also in our HTML, we also have first name, last name, age, okay? And so if I go and actually, let me go ahead and just run this. It's going to run through. I don't need a debugger here. I don't need to stop. I'm going to go ahead and run through this just like it is. And so these fields here are actually hard-coded, just to kind of mention that. As you can see, first name's John, last name's Doe, age is 30, and that's what's here. Even though that's the same thing that's here, this is just coming from the HTML. So I'm going to click greet person, and it's actually going to call this method, greet person, okay? So I'm going to call this, and you're going to see I already called it earlier, so here, let me just refresh. So I'm going to call greet person, and it's going to say, hello, my name is John Doe, right here, okay? First name, last name. But let me show you something interesting, because remember I just mentioned that in the HTML we had first name, last name, and let me show you the importance of this. Let's just say I don't use this here. Let's see what happens here. It does find it, right? It does know about this first name and last name, right? I'm going to save this now. Then I'll go ahead and hit greet and see what happens. Now it's actually returning HTML elements. What it's actually returning is this element, and this element, okay? Since I'm not using this, it's not referring it to this object. It's actually, since this is already defined, it's already defined within the document model, right? Within that HTML, that's what this is using. That's one of the importance of making sure you use this. So you know that this is referring to this object, this person object that we have here. I just changed that back to that. Run greet person. All is good. And obviously the same thing with age. Okay, so this is an important keyword, and important especially when you're creating objects. Okay, and let's look at this one here also. So this is creating a car object down here, the same thing for this. Let's see the car object here. Let's look at that one. Same thing. We have some hard-coded values: Toyota, Camry, right? And then we're calling those functions: update car, start my car, get my car details, right? So let's see here. Let me go ahead and put that in here. So actually, let me point out. So for this car object here, actually this is a class, right? This car class, different than our other object that we had, the person object, right? This is a class, a car class. What we're doing is, in this scenario, in this instance, we're actually creating a new car, both like a Toyota and a Camry. We've got two different ones here, two different car classes, and my car is a Toyota, and another car is the Honda here, right? So let's go. If I refresh, so this isn't within a function. So when I refresh this page, this is going to get executed. All right. So I'm going to put a breakpoint in here because I want to take a look at this, because I want to just kind of show you something, kind of go over this a little bit. Especially with this, just to kind of help you kind of understand this a little better. So I'm going to go ahead and just refresh this page, and it should start at this breakpoint. So when I refresh this page, now we're at this make and model. So here we're passing in Toyota, Camry, and the date, okay, or the year. So here, as you can, if I hover over this, you can see if I hover over model, it says undefined. All of these are undefined, okay? If I hover over the make here, you can see it says Toyota. If I hover over the model, Camry, over the year. So these here are coming from what's passed in, okay? These here are actually what it's kind of doing behind the scenes, so to speak. It's actually creating a new variable called make that's associated when we're using this with this car object, okay? So this dot make is undefined right now. So when I go over this, I'm going to go to the next line. When I go to the next line, this dot make is now Toyota, okay? Model is still undefined, year is still undefined. So this is what this is doing. And so the constructor, these are the ones that are being passed in. They get called by when we create a new car object like this, okay? And now these will belong to this car object, okay? And so let's go ahead and do that and that. And now we have a car object, okay, called my car here. Let me go ahead and let's just go ahead and hit continue on this. And I want to just go ahead and finish this. Okay, so we have this my car. So we have this my car object and this another car object. So this is all in memory now, right? It's all in this page memory. So if I get over here and go F12, if I just go my car, there's my car, okay? And then what was the other one? Another car? What do we call that other one? Another car, right? So if I do another car, right there, and there's the other car. So we know it's in memory now. Now another concept I kind of wanted to kind of share with you a little bit, and we kind of touched on it already, is the fact that with these objects, let me make this a little smaller. Let's make this a little easier to read. So with this, so my car and another car, these are two separate objects, right? Two separate objects. And like I said before, when you're using objects, when you have a variable, this is a reference variable to this object, okay? And this object is stored in memory, right? It's a reference to an object stored in memory. So even though this is a const, you can change, these values could change. We can update these values programmatically, right? We can always change these values. And even though we change these values, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's a const. It's okay to be a const because as long as you don't assign it to another variable, right? So let me just show you something here real quick again then. So if I take another car and I do this, and I do another car equals, let me do this, my car, and it's going to complain, assignment to a constant. So you can't change the reference, what it's referring to. Obviously, like I said, you could change, you could change details of the object, but you can't change the reference, right? It's kind of different than, it's a different thought pattern. You got to think of it differently than if you're using primitives and stuff. Because we know, like if you had a constant called x and you set that to the number 5, you can't now take x and set that to 10, right? It's because the primitives are by value, and so you can't do that. And for object references, you cannot change the object reference, but you can change that object itself, okay? The object can change, but not the reference, right? Here I try to change the reference. So here, let me do something a little different here. I'm going to just make these, we can leave that one a const, that's fine. Let me make this a let. Here, let me just make them both. Let me make them both lets. All right, let me save that now, and then I want to do refresh, save and refresh the page anyhow. So let me do my car here again, and we see that one. And then let me do another car here and see that one. Okay, one's Toyota, one's one's a Honda. Now if I do another car here and I'm going to assign another car to my car. Okay. And I'm going to hit enter. Now, let's go ahead and let's go to my car is Toyota. Another car is now Toyota, right? So what's happened is another car is pointing to the same object. So now my car and another car is pointing to the same object in memory. Okay. Let me show you something else here. So it's pointing the same reference. So what that means is if I update my car, let's say I change the year. If I change the year and click update my car, okay, and now let me go ahead and look at my car. Now it's 2025. Let me look at another car. And if I look at another car here, it's also 2025. So that shows that it's pointing to the same. It's referring to the same thing. So once you change one, it's going to change the other. Okay. Just kind of wanted to point that out. Okay. I also want to show you something here. So I have this also this calculator class over here. Okay. And so this thing has this constructs as value equals 0. Okay. So I'm going to take a look at that a little bit. So that's basically setting a default value is what that's doing. Value equals 0. But if we come down here, this calculator class is getting created here, creating a new calculator. Okay. So this is basically on page load, right? Because there's not in a function. It's basically right there in the in the script itself. So it's going to run when the page loads, right? It's going to create a new calculator object, and it's parsing the integer. It's parsing an integer here of this initial value. So if we go over here to the index.html, it has this value of initial value equals a 10. Okay, so it has this initial value equals a 10. So what this thing does here is, if you recall, we kind of discussed last week, we talked about truthy and falsy. So basically it's going to say if this is this truthy, this is going to be, is this value or this, right? Because when you do an or, this is pretty much like you're checking the values. And if it's true, then it's going to use that value, or it's going to use this default value. Okay. So what happens is here, so a new calculator gets created with a value of 10. Okay. I need to check this just to make sure. Is this going to work for me? We'll find out. So this is my version of the Chapter 16 lab. So what we have here is an HTML page, my interactive book library, where we add a new book, and you have a title, author, ISBN. Click to add the new book, and then we have a book list. So basically what happens here is the book list actually gets created dynamically. If we look on the left-hand side here in the code, we do have our form element, the top part up here. This top part is going to be basic, basically just HTML here, right? And then down here, your book list. The book list is the section down here at the bottom that gets created dynamically. And it's going to first get created dynamically. So I have two different books here. So these two books will be created when you load the page, okay? So for this assignment, make sure you have a form. And kind of what I mentioned now, and I'll mention it again here when we get to it, but make sure that you do the prevent default, because you've got a submit button down here. And when you hit that submit button, if you don't do prevent default, it'll try to submit your form. So I know that I'm sure you've all experienced that already. Well, try to submit your form. So you need to prevent that from happening. Okay. So what else is in here? Basically just have our bootstrap. We have our bootstrap. Make sure that you defer your JavaScript. If you don't defer your JavaScript, let me show you what's going to happen here. Let me save this. And as you can see on the right hand side, it didn't create the book list because the JavaScript's not deferred. Okay. It needs to be executed after everything on the page loads. Okay, once I put that back to defer, we're good on that. Just a basic bootstrap container with cards, with a card. So this top part's a card, and like I said, it's just this form itself. And then the bottom part is this div, is a book list. And this is going to be generated dynamically within our JavaScript code. We'll be appending to this div, correct? Let's see here. So here's the JavaScript code for, like I said, my version. You can do things the same or different. It's up to you. I have a using the created my own dollar function for a selector, just so I didn't have down here on line 21 through 25. Instead of doing get element by ID on each of these, I just created that. We're not doing a lot of that here, but I still did that anyhow. Obviously, if you're just doing a couple or a few, it's probably not a big deal. You don't save a lot. But if you got something complicated where you're doing a lot of get element by IDs or whatever, it's probably best to write a function to make it a little more concise, a little more easier to deal with. Then I go ahead and then I have this class, and this class has a constructor of title, author, and ISBN. And we're setting this.title, this.author, this.ISBN to the parameters that are getting passed. The arguments are passed. These are the parameters. Arguments are getting passed. And we are passing that. If we go down to the bottom here, we create these first two books dynamically from the beginning on page load. So if we go down here to the bottom, you'll see where we're taking the array and we're creating a new book and pushing that onto the library array. So you got two new books here. And then after we do that, we go ahead and we click display books, which will actually create these two books on the left-hand side. Okay, let's go back up to the top here. And as you notice, it's kind of escaping a character here. You got apostrophe S, so you're doing a backslash to escape that apostrophe. So just pointing that out since it's here. Obviously, you create your own books. You don't have to do the same ones I have here, but I'm just pointing that out since I kind of seen that there. All right. So we've got this new, like I said, we got this class, and we created two new books from the beginning. We have an is read also attribute property, I should say. An is read property, and that's set to false. So that's something that doesn't get passed in. It's just set to false by default. Okay. And then we have a function here called toggle read status. And this toggle read status will actually take this is read, and if this is read is whatever the value of this is read is, let's say if this is true, this is going to do the inverse of that. We'll make it false, right? So if this is true, it's going to make this false. If this is false, it's going to make this true. It's just going to be the opposite, right? That's what a toggle does, right? Here we've got our array, our library array, just an empty array, which we obviously when we load the page, it populated that. We use the array method push to push those two books onto the array. Here we're just getting reference to the HTML elements, basically the whole form, and then we have our title input, our author, our ISBN. Okay, and then we're also getting we're getting a reference to our book list div. Our book list div is the part, just to review quickly. This is where we're going to be putting all our dynamic content, right here, right? Right after that, this is where we put all our dynamic content. That's where the dynamic content is right now on the two books that are listed. It's already there, right? Obviously, you can't see it. It's in the document object model. If we go ahead and might as well just go look at it. I know this is a review and stuff. We've been doing this a little bit for a little while now with the document object model. So I'm just going to go ahead and click F12. I'm not sure why that said that, but that's okay. Sometimes you have errors and things for certain reasons. I don't know. Let's see what the style thing is here. Did I have I probably don't have a styles. I'll take a look at that. Okay, I don't want to get caught up on that right now. Okay, so here, so if I just go ahead and go to document, right, look at this document, and we can go look at our dynamic content. Not that we haven't done this before, but just kind of just to kind of take another look at this. So basically, here's our two books. There's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and then we have another one down here as well. So here's our two books in the document object model. And then obviously it's not going to be within the HTML. We know that, right? All right. So here's our function to display the books in the library. First thing we're doing is every time you click display books, you reset your inner HTML. So basically, what we just kind of looked at in the document object model. So we take that div and we're just going to go in and go ahead and clear out that current list of books in there. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our library array, and we're going to do a for each on that. And we've got a book and an index, okay? And then we're creating a new div for our book card. We're adding a class of column, right? We're adding a column, which is our bootstrap class of column. And then this book card, which is this div, we're going to go ahead and set the inner HTML to this whole div here. We have a height here. And obviously, you can do this completely different if you want. That's fine. This is just one possible solution for this lab. Obviously, just as a reminder, and make sure you're using the little ticks here. And these are not single quotes; these are ticks. And then in here, we got a card title, which is our book title, book.title, authors, book.author, etc. We do have this here, which is checks to see if the book is read. If it is read, then it's going to set the button success. And so let me show you that down here on the right-hand side on the web page. Currently, it's the yellow color mark is red. If I click this, two things are going to happen. it's going to turn the button to the button success, the Bootstrap class. And also it is going to change the text to, it's going to flip this to mark as unread. It's basically just toggling it, right? It's maybe kind of a little silly thing to have there, but that's okay. So mark as read. So and then you can click this if it's unread. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to click that. Now it's unread. So you click this to read. So basically that's what this is doing right here. Okay. This is what this is doing. To do this right, you need to make sure that you set this data index to the index so it knows which one, right? It has to be the specific one so it knows which one. In this case, this is the 0, 1. This is this, and this is the index 1, index 0 here, index 1 here for that toggle. Okay, and then after we've got this, this is an array. This is a loop. So for each card will create this, and then we want to make sure that we append that book card to our list div. So you can use this. You can follow along with this if you'd like. And then here we've got add event listeners to the toggle read buttons after they are added to the DOM. So this is adding event listeners for each one of those. So basically a library using this index. So this is going to be a different index depending on which one, right? And so there you have that. And then make sure you run display books to re-render the list to update the status. Okay. Then we have an event listener for adding a new book. And this is where you want to make sure that you do your prevent default. Okay. So this is on submit. This is the submit one, right? So this is basically the submit button here. And like I said, we want to make sure that we do the prevent default to prevent it from submitting. You want to get your title author, your ISBN, and you want to make sure they all have values, which is actually probably a little bit redundant, which is it's still not bad. You kind of best practices, even though all of these are set as required. It's always best practice. Sometimes, it's possible to get around that sometimes, and you can manipulate that to get around it if possible. There's ways to do that, so that you kind of check it, and you do that usually a lot of times in programming at multiple levels, and you check some things you check on the front end when you're coding for back end stuff. You check the same things again, just in case somehow something got through, right? But this isn't back end. This is still front end, obviously. But it's always good to do verify check. So you're basically saying if all of these values are present, and they should be because they are marked as required to submit it. Then you go ahead and create a new book. And you're going to push your book onto your library array. And then you want to go ahead and reset all your values. So the reset over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and add another book here. And add my book. And so if I went ahead and reset all those values, that was line 71 through 73 did on that. But down here, you added your new book. But obviously you did more than that, your new book, because the way we're doing this one, it's actually resetting all of it and just recreating it each time. So every time you add a new book, there's different ways to do that. Obviously, you can always just do an append to the current thing. But the way I have this set up, it's basically just recreating that. It creates a couple books on loading the page, and then every time that you add a book, it just recreates it from the library array. Okay. So we can always look to see what's in our library, all right? If I just go ahead and F12 or console. So there you go. You got 3 books. I'm a big fan of doing debugging and you know, also just doing consoles, using the console a lot just to see where things are, see if everything works. You know, it's a very handy and useful tools. All right, so we have that. And then let's see, so we did that one. This is what we were just looking at now, display books. And like I said, this is kind of redundant. Hopefully this should not get fired because we have all of our HTML things as required, so actually shouldn't, but never hurts to do a verification. And so really, I guess that's about it. And this is something that we kind of already went through, that we go ahead and we're pushing to do books from the beginning, and then we create our dynamic content. So hopefully, if you want, you can follow this. You know, you can pause or whatever and do this, or you know, if you want to create your own, that's fine. I know in the lab it mentions, you know, a couple optional things if you want to do. If you want to go ahead and maybe add a delete to delete a book, you can delete the book and just recreate it. That wouldn't take much to do that. So that was one thing. And then also, you know, another option if you want, if you've got the time and you'd like to, you can go ahead and use local storage to save your book list in local storage so that you can close your browser, come back, and you'll still have your book list, just like we did for a couple other assignments using the local storage. So, okay, so that's all I have. And please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. Have a good day.